There was a woman in our valley that nobody would marry, nobody would hire, and nobody, not even the preacher who was paid to love everyone, could stand to sit beside for the length of a single sermon. They called her impossible. They said it the way you'd say a horse was unbreakable or a winter unsurvivable. A fact, a thing settled long before you got there. I believed it too. God forgive me, I believed it for 11 years. And then a stranger rode in off the South Trail with a busted saddle and $40 to his name. And inside of one season, he did the thing the whole valley swore could never be done. He didn't change her. He just refused to agree with us about her. And it turned out that was the only thing that had ever been wrong. I wrote it all down because I'm an old man and I don't trust my own memory anymore, and because somebody ought to know the truth of it before the story gets told wrong at the next funeral. This is the truth of it, or as close as I can get. The first time I saw the stranger, Marin Tate was screaming at him in the rain, and I thought, well, there goes another one. I was up on the rise above her place, counting strays that had drifted off the bishop spread where I run things, and I had my collar turned up against the weather and my logbook buttoned inside my coat so the ink wouldn't run. I keep a logbook, have for 30 years. Weather, calving dates, which fences need mending, which men are worth their wages. My late wife used to say I'd write down my own dying breath if somebody handed me a pencil, and she wasn't wrong, and I didn't have an answer for her then, and I don't have one now. So I stood there in the wet, and below me, at the bottom of the slope where the Tate homestead sat half swallowed by mud, I watched a man I'd never seen before standing in her yard with his hat in his hands, and I watched Marin Tate scream at him. I couldn't hear the words, the rain ate them, but I knew the shape of it. Everybody in the valley knew the shape of it. You went to Marin Tate's place to buy an egg, to ask after a strayed cow, to do anything at all, and you came away scalded. She had a tongue on her like a branding iron. She'd run off the Hutchins boy when he came courting, years back, run him off so hard he joined the army to get away. She'd thrown a bucket at the tax man. She'd told Reverend Coyle to his face that his God was a coward who only showed up after the funeral, and the Reverend had gone white and never gone back. 11 years she'd been alone out there, and the valley had a long memory and a short patience, and somewhere in those 11 years we'd all quietly agreed on the word for her. Impossible. So I watched this stranger take his scalding in the rain, and I figured he'd do what the rest of us did. Mount up, ride off, tell the story in the saloon that night with his ears still ringing. He didn't. He stood there, hat in his hands, water running off his nose, and he let her finish. And when she finished, when she ran out of breath or out of fury, I couldn't tell which, he didn't ride off. He bent down real slow and he picked up something from the mud at her feet. A bucket, I think, one she'd dropped or thrown. And he set it upright on her porch rail, gentle, the way you'd set down something that might break. And then he put his hat back on, and he led his lame horse off her property without another word. I marked it in my logbook that night. I don't know why. Stranger at the Tate place, took the scolding, didn't scold back. I underlined the last part. Even then, some part of me knew I was watching something I hadn't seen before. His name was Cal Renner, and he was a horse breaker, and he'd come up from the territory looking for winter work. I learned this the way you learn everything in a valley like ours, sideways, over the course of a week, in pieces handed across the counter at Dunmore's store and traded back and forth at the livery. He'd taken a room above the saddlery. He paid for it, breaking the rough stock nobody else would touch, and he was good at it, good in a way that made the other hands stop and lean on their shovels to watch. He didn't fight the horses. That was the thing people kept saying about him, half admiring and half suspicious, the way folks talk about a man who does a hard thing without seeming to sweat. He don't fight 'em, he just waits 'em out. He was younger than I'd guessed from the rise, maybe 30, maybe a hard 28. Brown all over from the sun, quiet, with a way of looking at you while you talked that made you feel like your words were landing somewhere instead of just blowing past. He had a scar across the back of one hand, white and old. He never said how he got it, and nobody had the nerve to ask. What I couldn't figure was why a man who could have his pick of the spreads, and he could have, the Bishop place would have taken him on. I'd have taken him on, kept finding reasons to be on the South Road. The South Road went exactly one place worth going. It went past the Tate homestead. I asked Dunmore about it. Dunmore knew everything. It was practically his trade. He leaned across the counter and dropped his voice even though there was nobody in the store but his cat. "He's been buying her things," Dunmore said. "Buying who things?" "The Tate woman." He said it the way you'd say the haunted house. "Comes in, buys nails, lamp oil, a sack of seed corn, pays cash. Then he loads it on that broke-down horse of his and takes it out the South Road. Don't say a word about it. I asked him once was he sweet on her, and he looked at me like I'd asked him was he sweet on the weather. Said the woman's roof was open to the sky and a person can't winter under an open roof. Said it plain like it was just arithmetic. And she takes it, the seed corn, the nails." Dunmore scratched his jaw. "That's the queer part. First few times he found 'em throwed back in the road. Sack busted open, corn scattered, nails everywhere, like she'd chucked the whole load off her porch the second he was gone." He shook his head. "But he keeps buying, and the last sack didn't come back, so you tell me." I didn't have anything to tell him. I went home and I wrote it in my logbook. Renner still on the South Road. Last sack didn't come back. And under it, because I'm an old fool who's been alone a long time and notices things he shouldn't, I wrote, "Wonder what made her like she is." Nobody ever asks that. I want to be honest about something here because if I'm going to tell this straight, I have to. We never asked. Not one of us in 11 years. We decided what she was, and then we never once asked how she got that way. It's an easy thing to do, deciding a person. It saves you so much trouble. You don't have to wonder about somebody you've already finished wondering about. I'd known her before, see. That's the part that shames me. I'd known Marin Tate when she was Marin Holloway, when she was 19 and newly married to Tom Tate, and the two of them had come out to that homestead with a wagon full of hope and not much else. I'd helped Tom raise his first barn. Marin had brought us water and cold biscuits, and she'd laughed. I remember the laugh. It was a big laugh, too big for her small frame, the kind of laugh that made grown men grin like boys. She'd been about the friendliest thing in the valley. And then the diphtheria came through, the bad winter, the one we don't like to count up our dead from. And it took Tom. And it took both the children, the boy and the baby girl, in the same week, in the same bed. And Marin Tate buried her whole family in the frozen ground behind that house with her own hands, because the ground was too hard for anyone to help her, and the men were all burying their own. And then she'd gone quiet, and then she'd gone sharp, and we'd watched it happen, and we'd said, "Poor thing," for about a season, and then we'd run out of "poor thing" and started saying "impossible" instead, because grief that goes on too long stops looking like grief to people who have gotten comfortable again. It starts looking like meanness. It starts looking like a choice. I'd known all that, and I'd still let the word stick. That's the thing I have to live with. The first real conversation I had with Cal Renner was in October, when the aspens up the high draws had gone to gold and the mornings had teeth in them. I'd ridden out to fetch back 3 of the Bishop heifers that had a gift for getting through any fence God or man could build, and I'd lost the morning to it, and I came around the elbow of the South Road tired and short-tempered and found him there. He was on his knees in the road with a fence stretcher and a coil of wire, mending the gap in Marin Tate's fence where the rails had rotted clean through. Her place was 100 yards off. There was smoke coming from the chimney. There was no sign of her. "That's not your fence," I said. "It came out harder than I meant." He looked up at me, squinting against the low sun. "No, sir, it's not. You fixing it anyway." Cattle were getting in, tearing up what's left of her garden. He went back to the wire. His hands moved sure and easy, the scar flashing white. Seemed easier to fix the fence than to keep arguing with the cows. I got down off my horse. My knees told me about it. I'm not a young man, and I'd been 40 years in the saddle, and there are mornings my body sends up the bill for all of it at once. I crouched down beside him, and I held the wire taut while he stretched it, because that's a two-man job done right, and we worked a minute in the cold without talking. "She know you're out here?" I asked. "No. She'd run you off if she did." "Most likely." He tied off the wire neat and sat back on his heels and looked at the mended gap like he was reading it. "You knew her, before." It wasn't a question. I don't know how he knew. Maybe done more. Maybe he just looked at me. He had that way of looking and seen it. "I knew her," I said. "What was she like?" And I want you to understand, nobody had asked me that in 11 years. Nobody had asked anybody that. I crouched there in the cold road with my old knees screaming and a stranger's question hanging in the air, and I found that my throat had gone tight in a way I didn't expect, and I had to look off at the gold aspens for a second before I could answer. "She laughed," I said finally. "She had this laugh. You'd have heard it clear across a barn raising. She brought us water when we worked. She wasn't," I stopped. "She wasn't always this. She got made this. There's a difference and we forgot it." Cal Renner nodded slow, like I'd confirmed something he'd already worked out. He coiled the leftover wire and stood and offered me a hand up, and I took it, and his grip was strong and his eyes were steady, and I thought, this is a serious man. Whatever this is, it's not a passing thing. "She lost her family," he said. "It wasn't a guess." "How'd you know that?" He was quiet a moment. Then, "There's 3 little crosses behind her house, up on the rise where the ground drains good. She keeps 'em painted, whitewashed fresh, every one." He looked toward the house, the smoke, the silence. "A woman who keeps the paint up on 3 graves for 11 years isn't impossible to love, Mr. Pike. She's just doing all her loving in one direction, 'cause it's the only direction left that won't hurt her worse." He gathered his reins. "Folks see a closed door and call the house empty. House isn't empty, door's just shut." And then he led his lame horse off down the road, and I stood there in the cold with my mouth half open and no words in it, feeling about 2 inches tall and 100 years old. I'd lived in that valley my whole life. I'd thought I was a noticing kind of man. I kept a logbook, didn't I? Wrote everything down. And it took a drifter with $40 to his name and a scar he wouldn't talk about to notice the one thing that had been sitting plain in front of all of us for 11 years. She kept the paint up on the graves. I went home and I didn't write anything in my logbook that night. I just sat by my fire and thought about my own wife, 3 years in the ground now, and how I'd let her flowers die because tending them hurt too much, and how that had felt like the loving thing to do at the time but might have just been the cowardly one. And I thought maybe Marin Tate was braver than the whole valley put together, keeping that paint up, year on year, refusing to let the rain have the only family she had left. Impossible to love, we should have been ashamed. It went on into November like that, and I won't pretend I understood it while it was happening. I only understood it after, the way you only ever understand the important things after. But I started riding the South Road on purpose, telling myself it was the heifers. It wasn't the heifers. I saw the small things accumulate. A new pane of glass in her kitchen window where there'd been a board for years. A cord of split wood appeared by her lean-to, stacked too neat to be her doing. The hole in her roof that Dunmore had mentioned, gone, patched over with fresh cedar shakes that you could see were new because they hadn't grayed out yet. Cal never said he'd done any of it. I never saw him do it. He did it the way water gets into a low field, quiet and from underneath, so that by the time you notice it, the whole thing's already changed. And here's the part I have to tell careful, because it's the heart of it. She let him. That's all. That's the whole miracle of it, and it doesn't sound like much when you lay it flat like that, but you have to understand what it cost her. This was a woman who'd thrown his seed corn in the road, who'd screamed him out of her yard in the rain, who'd spent 11 years making herself so unpleasant that the world would leave her alone with her grief, because the world's pity had turned out to be the one thing she couldn't survive. She'd built a wall out of her own meanness, brick by brick, and it had worked. It had kept everyone out. It had kept her safe in her sorrow. And here was a man taking that wall apart from the outside, one mended fence at a time, and asking nothing back. Not gratitude, not a smile, not a word. He just kept showing up and doing the next quiet thing and leaving before she could throw it back at him. And she let him. She stopped throwing things in the road. She let the wood stack stand. She let the new shake stay on her roof. For a woman like her, that was the same as throwing the gates wide. I caught the change in her face once in town, the only time she came in that whole month. She came to Dunmore's for flour and the whole store went quiet the way it always did, everybody finding something to study on the far shelves, nobody meeting her eye. The old ritual. The cold shoulder we'd all agreed she'd earned. And Cal Renner came in behind her, not with her, just behind her, the way you'd happen to come in behind anyone. And he didn't make a show of it. He just said easy to the room and to nobody, morning. And then to her, the same easy way, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, Miss Tate, cold one. And the whole store held its breath, waiting for the branding iron. And Marin Tate looked at him, and something moved across her face. I was close enough to see it, and I'll carry it the rest of my days. It was like watching ice give on a river in spring. That first crack, that first dark seam of moving water under all that white. It was there and gone in half a second, and then her jaw set again and she said, cold, flat as a board, and turned back to her flour. But it had been there, the crack, I saw it. I went out to my horse and I sat in the cold and I got out my logbook with hands that weren't quite steady and I wrote, she answered him. One word, but she answered. And then I sat there a while longer, because I'm an old man and I'd buried a wife and let her flowers die. And I just watched a woman I'd helped condemn start, just barely, to come back to life. And I found I had to wipe my face before I could ride home, and it wasn't the wind doing it. That was the autumn. That was how it started, quiet from underneath like water in a low field. I didn't know yet about the blizzard that was coming. I didn't know about the night that would test all of it, Cal's patience, Marin's cracked open heart, and the whole valley's long, ugly habit of deciding a person and then refusing to look again. I didn't know that the hardest thing was still ahead, for both of them, and that before the winter was out somebody was going to have to make a choice that no amount of mended fences could make easy. The blizzard came down out of the north on the second week of December, and it came the way the worst ones always do, not with warning but with a kind of held breath. I'd seen it building for 2 days. The cattle knew before I did. They always do. They'd stopped grazing and bunched up against the south side of every windbreak they could find, standing with their tails to the north and their heads down, patient and dumb and waiting. The sky went the color of a dirty fleece. The air got that flat metal smell that sits at the back of your throat. And then on the third morning the wind swung around hard and the first snow came sideways. And by noon you couldn't see the barn from the house. And by dark the whole valley had gone white and roaring and gone from the map entirely. I want you to understand what that kind of storm is, for those who have never met one. It isn't weather. Weather is a thing that happens to you. A bad blizzard is a thing that wants you. It comes into the cracks of your house and finds the warm places and pulls the heat out of them. It takes the sound out of the world and puts in its own sound, this long, unbroken animal howl that gets into your head and stays there. Men have walked out to their own barns in storms like that and never arrived. Frozen 40 feet from their own doors, turned around in the white, no farther from the fire than a stone's throw, and dead all the same. I rode out the first night in my own place, alone, listening to the wind try the windows. I thought about Marin Tate out on that homestead with her freshly patched roof, and I thought about Cal Renner in his room above the saddlery, and I told myself they'd both have the sense to stay put. Then I poured myself a whiskey, and I did not believe myself, not for 1 minute. Cal Renner did not have the sense to stay put. I'd known that since the day he picked the bucket up out of the mud. I didn't see what happened at the Tate place that night. I have to tell it the way I got it after some from Cal, said reluctant and in pieces, and some from her, much later, said in a voice I'd never heard her use. But I've turned it over enough times that I can see it now nearly as clear as if I'd been there, and I'll set it down the best I can, and where I'm guessing I'll say so. Marin Tate's chimney caught fire about an hour after full dark. It happens. Creosote builds up in a flue over a season, and you get a hot enough fire on a cold enough night, and the whole inside of the chimney goes up at once, a roar inside the wall, sparks pouring out the top into the snow. In a stone chimney you ride it out. But the Tate chimney was old and half mortar, and it cracked, and the fire got out of it and into the wall. She was alone. She did what a person does, she fought it. She told me much later that she'd thought very clearly standing there with a wet blanket in her hands and the wall going orange beside her. Let it burn. Let it take the whole thing. I'm so tired. She told me that plain, looking at her hands. She said the thought wasn't even sad. It was almost a relief. 11 years of holding on, and here was the storm offering to make the decision for her. And then she said she thought about the graves. The 3 little crosses on the rise behind the house, whitewashed fresh every spring. If the house burned and she went with it, there'd be nobody left to keep the paint up. Nobody to remember which cross was the boys and which was the babies. The valley would let them go gray and then green, and then they'd fall, and the rise would just be a rise again, and it would be as if Tom and the children had never been at all. She was the last thread holding them to the world. If she let go, they let go too. So she fought the fire. A woman alone in a blizzard against a wall of flame because 3 painted crosses on a hill still needed her. If you want to know what endurance is, real endurance, not the kind they put in songs, it's that. It's a person with every good reason to quit, finding one small reason not to, and choosing it over and over in the dark. She was losing. Cal saw the glow. He'd gone out into the storm, and here's where I stop pretending I understand people, because no sane man goes out into a killing blizzard, and Cal Renner was as sane as any I ever met. But he told me, when I finally got it out of him, that he'd had a bad feeling about her chimney for a month. He'd been meaning to clean it. He'd kept finding reasons not to push it, because pushing it meant being in her house, and being in her house meant crossing a line he'd been careful not to cross. He'd done all his caring from outside. From the road, the fence, the woodpile, the chimney was inside. So he'd put it off. And now there was a storm, and he was lying awake in his rented room with the wind screaming, doing the arithmetic he was always doing, and the arithmetic came out wrong. And he got up and he saddled that lame horse, the only horse he had, and he rode out into the white to a place he could not see, toward a woman who had thrown his kindness in the road, because he could not lie there and let the numbers be what they were. He nearly died doing it. He told me that part flat, no drama in it, the way he said everything. He lost the road inside of a quarter mile. He found it again by getting down and feeling for the wheel ruts with his bare hands. He lost it again. The horse wanted to quit and he didn't blame it. He said there was a stretch in the middle where he genuinely did not know if he was riding toward her place or away from it, and he just trusted the wind to be coming from the north like it had been, and kept it on his right cheek, and prayed the wind hadn't swung. Then he came over the last rise and saw the orange glow chewing up through the snow, and he knew 2 things at once, that he'd been right about the chimney, and that he might be too late. He got her out. I'll not stretch it into more than it was. He got the door open and found her on the floor, overcome by the smoke, the wet blanket still clutched in her hands like she'd meant to keep fighting right up until she couldn't. He carried her out into the snow. He got her into the linta where the wood was, the wood he'd split and stacked, and that's a thing I think about, that the shelter that saved both their lives was a kindness he'd done weeks before, never knowing. He got the lame horse in there too. And the 3 of them rode out the rest of that night in a woodshed in a blizzard, while the Tate house burned itself down to the stone, and the snow put it out by morning. The house was gone, everything in it gone, the bed where her children had died, the table Tom had built, all of it ash under snow. But the graves on the rise were untouched. The fire never reached them. And she was alive. And he was alive. And when the storm broke on the morning of the second day and I rode out, I couldn't have kept myself away with chains. What I found in that linta was the thing I've been trying to get down on paper ever since, and I don't have the words for it, and I'm going to fail at it now, and I'm going to write it anyway. I found them sitting against the woodpile, the two of them, wrapped in horse blankets, gray with ash and smoke. And Marin Tate was crying. Not the hard, bitter, throw-it-in-the-road kind of crying you might expect from a woman who just watched the last of her family's things burn. It was a different kind. It was the kind that comes up from way down, the kind that's been dammed up for 11 years, the kind that finally breaks because. And this is the part that undid me, because for the first time in all those years, there was somebody sitting beside her while she did it. It was the difference. That was the whole thing. She'd grieved alone for 11 years. She'd kept the paint up alone. She'd fought the fire alone. And now, at the very bottom of it, with everything gone, she was not alone. There was a man beside her who'd ridden through a killing storm to be there, and who wasn't saying any of the useless things, wasn't saying it's all right when it wasn't saying at least you're alive when that wasn't a comfort yet, wasn't saying poor thing. He was just sitting there, letting her cry. His scarred hand resting on the blanket near hers, not holding it, just near it in case. I stood in the door of that linta with the snow blinding white behind me, and I did not go in. Some moments you don't walk into. I just stood there, an old fool with frost in his mustache, and I watched a woman the whole valley had given up on weep 11 years of grief into the shoulder of a man who'd refused to give up on her, and I thought, we were so wrong. God, we were so wrong about her for so long. I wrote 4 words in my logbook that night. He went. She let him. I couldn't write any more. My hand wouldn't. Now, I'd like to end part 2 there on that lean-to, because it's a fine place to stop and it would make the story easier. But I told you at the start I'd tell it straight, and the straight of it is that the story did not stop there, and the next part is the ugly part, and it's the part with the valley in it, which means it's the part with me in it, and I won't leave it out. Because here is what happened when word got around. You'd think, wouldn't you, that a town would hear a story like that and soften. Man rides through a blizzard, pulls a woman from a burning house, saves her life. You'd think folks would look at Marin Tate fresh after that, and at the two of them together and feel something open up. A little shame, maybe. A little gladness for her. Some human decency. That is not what happened. What happened was the valley got mean about it. It started at Dunmore's, the way it always did. Somebody, I'll not name him, he's dead now and it doesn't matter, said it didn't look right. A drifter shacked up out at the Tate place with a widow woman, the two of them out there alone with no house even, just a shed. Said you had to wonder what kind of man chases after a woman everybody knows is poison. Said maybe he was after the land. Said maybe she'd snared him finally. Having run off every decent prospect, gone and got her hooks in some rootless drifter who didn't know any better because he wasn't from here and hadn't heard about her. And it spread. Lord, how it spread. Within a week the story going around wasn't a man saved a woman's life. The story going around was that Tate woman's finally trapped some fool, and him a stranger we know nothing about, and isn't it just like her, and what's he really after? They took the finest thing I'd ever seen a man do and they turned it, in the telling, into something low and grasping and suspect. Because it was easier. Because if Cal Renner was just a fool or a fortune hunter, then they didn't have to look at what they'd been to Marin Tate for 11 years. They didn't have to feel it. A decided person is a comfortable thing, like I told you, and we decided her. And here was this stranger insisting just by his actions that we decided wrong, and rather than admit it, the valley decided him too. Made him a schemer. Made the rescue a scheme. Tidied the whole uncomfortable thing away. And I'd love to tell you I stood up in Dunmore's store and set them straight, told them what I'd seen in that lean-to, shamed them with it. I didn't. God help me. I stood there with my coffee and I let it wash over me, and I said nothing, because I'd been one of them for 11 years and the habit of going along is the strongest habit there is. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself the talk would die down. I went home and I got out my logbook to write the day down, and I sat there with the pencil, and I could not make myself write a word, because every honest word would have had to start with "I said nothing," and I couldn't bear to see it in my own hand. That's where my courage was that winter. That's the kind of man I was. I could see the truth clear as glass and I could write it down for nobody, and that's not the same as having the spine to say it out loud where it counted, and I knew it, and the knowing sat in me like a stone. It got back to Cal. Of course it did. Talk like that always finds the one it's about. He came to me, not anybody else, and I've wondered since whether it was because he'd seen something in my face that day in the road, that day I told him about her laugh. He came to the Bishop place on a gray afternoon between storms, and he stood in my yard with his hat in his hands, the same way he'd stood in hers, and he asked me straight, was it true, what they were saying, that the only decent thing for a man to do if he cared what happened to her, if he didn't want to ruin what little standing she had left, was to ride on, leave the valley, go back south, let her be? Because that was the cruelty of what the gossip had done, you see. It had put Cal Renner in a trap with no good door. If he stayed, he confirmed the talk Drifter shacked up with the widow, and every day he stayed made it worse for her, dragged her name lower. And if he went, he abandoned the one person in the world he decided was worth not abandoning. Stay and shame her, or go and break her. The valley had built him that trap without even meaning to, just by being what it was, and now it sat there waiting to see which way he'd jump. He asked me what he should do, an old man who kept a logbook and lacked the spine to speak up in a store. He asked me. And I want to tell you I gave him the right answer. I want to end part 2 with the foreman finding his courage at last and telling that good man to stay, to fight, to be damned to the valley. But I told you I'd tell it straight. What I said was, I don't know, son. What I said was that folks here had long memories and she had to live among them after he was gone, whatever he chose, and maybe the kindest thing was the hardest thing. What I said, God forgive me, was the coward's answer dressed up as wisdom, the same answer the whole valley would have given, because in that moment with him standing there asking, I was still one of them. I went to bed that night a coward and I woke up one too. That doesn't change in your sleep. But something else had happened in the night, down underneath, the way the important things happen quiet from below, like water in a low field. I dreamed of my wife. I don't dream of her often, which is its own kind of grief. But that night she was in the yard the way she used to be, hanging wash, and she didn't say anything wise or ghostly to me. She just looked at me the way she'd look when I'd done something small and gutless, and we both knew it, and she was waiting to see if I'd own up. That look. 3 years gone and she could still level me with it from inside a dream. And I woke up before light with her look still on me and the stone still in my chest, and I lay there in the cold dark listening to the eaves drip. A thaw had come in the night, the first soft morning in a month, and I thought about what I'd told Cal Renner. Maybe the kindest thing is the hardest thing. What a fine, sad, useless piece of wisdom that was. I'd handed a good man the valley's own cowardice and called it kindness, and he'd been decent enough to thank me for it. And now, he was going to ride south, and a woman who just learned, at the very bottom of everything, that she didn't have to be alone. That woman was going to wake up one of these mornings and find herself alone again, and this time she'd know exactly what she was missing, which is the worst way there is to be alone. I'd done that. Me and my logbook and my fine sad wisdom. I got up. I was an old man and my knees told me about it and I didn't care. I saddled my horse in the dark and I rode for town with the thaw water running in the ruts and the sky going gray-pink behind me. And I did not have a speech ready, and I did not have a plan, and I was scared the whole way, which I'll own to, because at my age a man knows that doing the right thing late is no guarantee it'll do any good. He was already loading the horse when I got to the saddlery. First light barely. Saddlebags on, bedroll lashed, that lame horse sounder now. He'd nursed it all autumn, standing patient in the thaw. He was going. He'd taken my coward's advice and he was going, and he meant to be gone before the town woke up to watch him do it, because even his leaving he was trying to do gentle, so as not to make a thing of it that might splash back on her. "Cal," I said. He turned. He had that steady look, but there was something worn under it, something that hadn't been there in the autumn. A man can carry a great deal and still break a little, and he'd carried a great deal. "Mr. Pike." I got down off my horse. My knees. I didn't care. I stood in the muddy thaw in front of the saddlery with the town still asleep around us, and I made myself say it, and it came out clumsy, because the true thing nearly always does. It's the lies that come out smooth. "I told you wrong," I said. 2 days ago. You asked me what to do, and I gave you the valley's answer, and I dressed it up as wisdom, and it was a lie. And I've known it was a lie since the second it left my mouth, and I've laid awake on it. And I'm an old man, and I'm tired of being a coward, and I came to tell you before you ride off carrying my cowardice south with you. Don't go." He didn't say anything. The horse shifted its feet. "You asked was the kindest thing to leave," I said. "It isn't. The kindest thing you ever did in your life was ride into a blizzard for a woman who'd thrown your seed corn in the road. And the cruelest thing you could do now is teach her, right after that, the people who do that, the people who come for her, leave. That every good thing's just on loan. She already believes that. The whole world's been teaching her that for 11 years. Don't you teach it to her too. You're the one piece of evidence she's got against it. Don't ride off and prove the world right." Something moved in his face. The worn thing cracked, just a little, the way the ice had cracked on Marin Tate in Dunmore's store, that first dark seam of moving water. "They're saying I'm after her land," he said, quiet. "After whatever she's got, that I trapped her, that a man's only chasing a woman like her if he's got a low reason." He looked off down the empty street. "I won't be the thing that drags her name lower than it already is, Pike. She's got little enough left. If me staying costs her what little standing." Her standing. And here something came up in me hot that I didn't know was in there. "Cal, son, she hasn't had any standing in this valley for 11 years. We took it from her. We decided her and we took it, and we've been comfortable about it ever since. There is no standing of hers left for you to protect. There's just her. The actual living woman, who keeps the paint up on 3 graves, who fought a fire alone because of those graves, who cried for the first time in 11 years because you sat beside her while she did it. You're not protecting her standing by leaving. You're just protecting us, the rest of us, from having to look at what we've been. And I'm done protecting that. I'd rather be ashamed out loud than comfortable in quiet for one more day of my life." I was breathing hard. An old man breathing hard in the mud in front of a saddlery at dawn. And Cal Renner looked at me for a long moment, and then he did a thing I didn't expect. He laughed. Not a big laugh, just a short breath of one, low, with his eyes going bright at the edges. "You kept a log on us," he said. "All autumn, didn't you? I'd see you up on that rise with your little book." "Every day," I said. "God help me." "What's it say?" He nodded at where it sat, buttoned in my coat the way it always was. "The last thing. What's the last thing you wrote?" And I got it out, and I opened it to the line, and I'm not ashamed to tell you my hands weren't steady, and I read it to him there in the cold. He asked me what to do, and I failed him. He was quiet. Then he reached out that scarred hand, and he didn't take the book. He just put a finger on the page, light over the words. "Then change it," he said. He stayed. "I'd like to tell you the valley came around in a rush, that they were all shamed by the sight of an old foreman finding his spine, that they took Marin Tate back into the fold with tears and casseroles. It didn't happen like that. People don't change like ice on a river. They change like rock, slow, and some of them never change at all and just die the way they lived, hard. There were folks in that valley who went to their graves believing Cal Renner had schemed his way onto the Tate land. You can't fix everybody. I've stopped trying. But it changed enough. Because I did the thing I should have done weeks before. I told it. At Dunmore's with people around in the daylight where it counted. I told them what I'd seen in that lean-to. I told them about the blizzard and the bare hands feeling for the wheel ruts. I told them she'd kept the paint up on 3 little graves for 11 years and asked them, out loud, which of them had done a harder or more faithful thing in their soft, warm houses all that time. I told them we'd decided a grieving woman was impossible to love because it was easier than being the people who loved her, and that I'd been the worst of them because I'd known her before, known her laugh, and let the words stick anyway. It got quiet in the store, real quiet. Dunmore's cat was the loudest thing in it. And then old Mrs. Hutchins, whose boy Marin had run off years back, who had as much reason as anyone to keep the grudge, old Mrs. Hutchins set down her basket and said, into all that quiet, "Tom Tate built my husband's coffin, did it for nothing. Winter of the diphtheria when there wasn't a sober carpenter left standing." She looked around the store. "Marin brought the nails. I'd forgot that till just now. I'd let myself forget it." She picked her basket back up. "I'll take a sack of that seed corn, Mr. Dunmore, and a second one, for out the South Road." That's how it turns when it turns. Not all at once. One person remembering one true thing they'd let themselves forget. They married in the spring, Cal and Marin, under the cottonwoods by the creek, because she would not be married in any church belonging to a god she told the Reverend was a coward. And Cal, who I think agreed with her more than he ever said, just smiled and stood where she wanted him to stand. It was a small wedding. Not everyone came, but more came than I'd have bet $1 on the winter before, and Mrs. Hutchins was among them, and that meant something. They rebuilt the house, on the same ground. Cal wanted to move it to a better spot, drier, but Marin wouldn't have it, and I understood why, and so did he the minute she said it. The house had to stay where it could see the rise, where she could look out the kitchen window and see the 3 crosses. They weren't to be left behind. They never would be. Cal built her a window in that kitchen wide as a door, facing the graves, and that was the truest love letter I ever saw a man write. And he wrote it in cedar and glass and never said a word about what it was for. Here's the part I keep coming back to, though. The part that's the kindness repaid, if you want to call it that, though it's a poor flat phrase for it. It was Cal who started keeping the paint up. I saw him at it the first spring after, up on the rise with a brush and a pail of whitewash, careful, doing the boy's cross and the baby's and Tom's, the man whose widow he'd married, the man whose place he now slept in. He did it the way he did everything, quiet, asking nothing, no show in it. He was painting another man's graves because the woman he loved had carried them alone for 11 years, and now she didn't have to carry anything alone ever again, and that included the dead. Especially the dead. That's the thing the Valley never understood about loving Marin Tate, the thing that made her impossible. They thought to love her you'd have to get her over the grief, make her stop, move her on, and she'd have killed any man who tried, and rightly. Cal never tried. Cal just picked up a brush and joined her in it. He didn't love her instead of her grief. He loved her grief along with the rest of her because it was hers and he was taking all of her or none. That's what none of us could see. That's the whole of it. The grief wasn't the wall keeping love out. The grief was the thing most needing to be loved, and we'd all been trying to get her to put down the one thing she couldn't. She wasn't impossible to love. She was just waiting, all those years, for someone who'd help carry it instead of asking her to set it down. I'm an old man now, and this is the last of it. Marin still won't suffer fools and never will, and I'm glad of it. The sharpness was never the disease, it was the scar, and you don't begrudge a person their scars. But the laugh came back. It took 2-3 years, but it came back, that big laugh, too big for her frame. The one I remembered from when she was 19 and bringing water to the men raising her husband's barn. I heard it again at last, across a barnyard on a summer evening, and I had to stop and lean on a fence post, because I'm an old fool and it caught me right in the chest. The sound of a thing the whole valley swore was dead and gone forever, alive again and ringing. Cal's gone gray at the temples. The lame horse is buried up on the rise now too, off to the side, and nobody painted a cross for it, but everybody knows where it lies. They never had children of their own. That grief I won't pretend away, it's there. It sits at their table some evenings, I've seen it. But last fall the Prout girl from down the creek lost both her folks to the fever, and there was talk of sending her to an aunt back east who didn't want her, and Marin Tate rode into Dunmore's and said, flat as a board in front of everybody, she'll come to us. And that was the end of the talk.